When you look at this photo, you see a Japanese woman who is smiling in a creepy manner with her head tilted. But believe it or not, this woman is actually real, and there's a backstory to this photo. Sometime in early 2011 in Japan, a broadcasting company was televising a show about psychics and invited a wide audience. As part of marketing, the photographers took pictures of the audience for a magazine, and in the mid-2015s, one of the photos resurfaced on the internet with all the female audience members' eyes blurred out, except for one woman, who looks almost as if she was possessed by a spirit. Because of how creepy this woman looked, this photo gained infamy in the internet community and was believed by enough people that it made into mainstream media. But after much digging, it turns out that this photo was actually fake, and this particular woman was actually a real person whose name still remains unknown to the public. But if you're wondering, this is the original photo of the event in which the internet still claims it is just as creepy as the fabricated image.
Now that I've seen it, I can't unsee it. So the other day, a Reddit user posted this photo to Reddit. It's of his apartment at night. He had been complaining of hearing rustling noises in his apartment over the last couple nights. Many users thought they could kind of see something in this area of his kitchen, but I couldn't, so I looked at the brightened version. This is the photo brightened. And I know what you're gonna say, yes it does look like Keanu Reeves, but look at how tall he is compared to the fridge. But it gets so much worse. This is a video he took of his apartment at night where you can see something happen to the light in the kitchen. But let's look at the brightened version. Yes, it's terrifying, but is it a ghost?
What they find out years later will haunt you. A young couple decided to take a late-night stroll through the forest, but little did they know what awaited them. As they walked, the man felt a sense of unease, but his girlfriend dismissed his concerns. Suddenly, the man stepped on something that felt alive and squishy under his feet. Before he could react, they heard rustling from the bushes beside them. They ignored it and kept walking until they returned home. Years later, and they were watching TV when an interview with a death row inmate caught their attention. The man had been asked if he had ever came close to getting caught for his heinous crimes. The killer responded with a chilling tale. Yes, I remember one night in the woods, a couple walked right by me. The man stepped on the body of the girl who I had just killed. I was hiding in the bushes just a few feet away, but they never saw me. The couple watched in horror as the name of one of the most notorious serial killers was revealed. His name was Ted Bundy. Follow because my next story is crazy.
This kid recorded himself before shooting up a school, and it's absolutely terrifying. This is Nicholas Cruz, and on February 14th, 2018, he shot up a high school in the Parkland, Florida area, murdering 17 people and injuring another 17. And this video shows him talking about it the day before he does it. And it's absolutely disturbing.
Hello, my name is Nick, and I'm going to be the next school shooter of 2018. My goal is at least 20 people with an AR-15 and a couple tracer rounds. I think I can do a good done. Location is Stone Douglas in Parkland, Florida. It's going to be a big event. And when you see me on the news, you'll all know who I am. You're all going to die.
Family tries desperately to get rid of this haunted Elsa doll.
In 2013, a woman named Emily gifted her child an Elsa doll. Now, this doll had the ability to speak when a button was pushed. After owning the doll for years, the doll would suddenly start speaking. And I mean, when the button wasn't even being pushed. To make things even creepier, the doll actually started speaking Spanish, and there was no settings on the doll to change its language. Now, Emily was sick of the doll, and so she decided to just throw it in the trash. 1 week after throwing it in the trash, Emily found the doll sitting on the bench. Now, she immediately questioned her daughter, but her daughter promised she did not take it out of the trash. So Emily wrapped up that doll again, and this time made sure it was in the garbage. And the doll again made its way back to Emily's house. Understandably, she was completely freaked out. In the end, the doll was mailed to a family friend who assured Emily that he would get rid of it. And luckily for the family, there's been no Elsa doll sightings. For more 7 Sin Crime stories, remember to hit the plus button.
These 4 men wreaked havoc on Australia in the 90s, and you will not believe how they got caught. They're known as the Snowtown Killers, and the shorter guy in the middle is John Bunting. He's the man behind this vicious murder spree and convinced a few of his friends to help him kidnap people with disabilities so they could claim their disability checks from the government. John loved to torture these people while playing recordings of his previous victims screaming for help. He would even stare into the eyes of his victims while one of the other men strangled them. He would tell them to stop just before they died, letting them recover briefly before repeating the process over again. Eventually, John would just murder them and pack their bodies into plastic barrels which he would store in an abandoned bank. However, he had no sense of smell, and the stench of the barrels was so bad that neighbors reported him, which led to his eventual capture. John Bunting was then taken to court where he received 11 consecutive life sentences.
There's so many surprising facts about Cleopatra that are just not common knowledge, like the fact that she was actually born closer to the invention of the iPhone than to the actual pyramids being built. And I just want to share a few more of them with you today because some of them are very dark. And a reminder, if you like the dark and spooky, you'll love the podcast. So first and foremost, Cleopatra was severely inbred. Most people have 8 great-grandparents, but Cleopatra only has 2. Like, look at this. So this is our girl Cleopatra the 7th. So her parents had the same grandparents, and her grandpa was her grandma's uncle. She was so inbred that some historians believe that myths of her beauty were actually just propaganda, and depictions of her at the time show her with features that are much more exaggerated than what we see. She also married her little brother and had him killed. But she also liked to have fun. Her and Mark Antony used to just run around getting drunk in disguises so that no one knew who they were. The Egyptians at the time also had many different forms of birth control that they would use, and this one was maybe a bit before her time, but they would mix crocodile dung with honey and insert it via suppository. What is some of the craziest stuff people have confessed to as they're dying? Well, in this series, I'm going to read to you some of the craziest ones I could find. This story comes from a hospice nurse that was dealing with a patient who had fought in the Vietnam War. Early on in his treatment, she actually asked him if he had any siblings, and he mentioned that he did have a brother, but he passed away in Vietnam. He also had a wife who had previously passed away, and because of this, he didn't have a lot of people that would come visit him. The man had dementia, and the nurse said that at times it felt like he was digging deep into his brain to find moments from his life that he could describe to the nurse in vivid detail. So one night the nurse comes in, and the man is in really rough shape, like it looks like he's not going to make it through the night. And when she walks in, he starts beckoning her over, like, come here, come here, come here. So the nurse comes over, and the man begins to tell her that his brother wasn't killed by an enemy soldier in Vietnam. He had actually killed his brother. And not only that, but these men were twins. So when the brother died, the other one fully assumed his identity when he came back to the States. Meaning that when he came back from the war, he took his brother's entire life, including his wife. The man ended up passing away that night, and later on the nurse told his daughter what she had heard. And the daughter did not believe her at all, but then years later, she finds a handwritten confession from her father stuffed in a Bible.
Do not watch this video if you are easily disturbed. This is this sickening, very recent case of Lily Peters. On the 24th of April 2022, 10-year-old Lily Peters was making her way home from her auntie's house in Wisconsin. She was biking and she was familiar with this route because she'd done it many times before. When she didn't return home that night, her dad reported her missing to police. What transpired was her parents' worst nightmare. Her body was discovered the following day at around 9 a.m. Officers located a bike that ended up being Lily's in the woods near a walking trail at the end of her aunt's street, and her body was discovered shortly after. Disturbing details emerged about Lily's death. She'd suffered blunt force trauma and had been strangled. Her body had then been SA'd. But who on earth would do such a thing to such an innocent little girl? 2 days after she disappeared, police charged Lily's 14-year-old cousin, Carson Peters. He'd allegedly been riding home with Lily when the horrific incident occurred. It's alleged that he punched her in the stomach and attacked her. Now, the case is still ongoing, but he has admitted to the attack. Interestingly, his father is Adam Berger, who is pictured here. He spent 3 years in prison for being a convicted pedophile. Now, Carson's bail is set to $1 million, and if convicted, he could spend life in prison.
My body was found naked in a creek. My name is Amber Hagerman. I remember that cold winter day in Arlington, accessed like it was yesterday. I was only 9 years old, but I was so excited to go for a bike ride. The cold air made my nose wet, but didn't mind. I just wanted to feel the wind in my hair and go on an adventure. I rode around my neighborhood passing by familiar houses and way into my neighbors. But then everything changed. I heard a man's voice, and before I knew it, I was snatched off my bike and thrown into his up. I was so scared. I screamed and cried, begging him to let me go, but he didn't listen. He drove away with me, and I knew that I was never going to see my family or friends again. Days passed, and my family and the police searched for me, but they couldn't me. I was alone, cold, and scared. Then it happened. I was dumped into a nearby creek. My lifeless body left to be found by strangers. I never got to say goodbye to my family and friends. I never got to live my and experienced all the wonderful things that the world had to offer. My life was taken away from me, and I was left to be a memory.
His mother murdered her 3 kids during a psychosis episode. On January 24th, 2023, 32-year-old Lindsay Clancy took the life of her 5-year-old daughter Cora, 3-year-old son Dawson, and 7-month-old baby Callan. On this day at 4:53 p.m., Lindsay asked her husband Patrick to pick up some dinner at a restaurant not too far from the house. About an hour later, Patrick returned home and noticed that there was absolute silence. He called for Lindsay's name, and after no response, he went into the bedroom and noticed that the window was open. Lindsay had jumped out the window in an attempt to take her own life, but she was still alive. This is where things get really sad. Patrick went to the basement and found all 3 kids with exercise cords around their necks. Both Cora and Dawson passed away in the hospital, but baby Callan passed away 3 days later due to his injuries. Lindsay's defense attorney claims that she was suffering from postpartum psychosis, which led her to break from reality and murder her children. But the state attorney argues that these killings were premeditated and that Lindsay sent her husband to get food on purpose so that she can commit these crimes. However, Dr. Caney, who is a board member of Postpartum Support International, clarified that women can completely break with reality during violent episodes. She also said that women who are a few weeks postpartum should be aware of the symptoms of psychosis, which is usually hallucinating. Lindsay was charged with 2 counts of murder, 3 counts of strangulation and assault, and battery with a deadly weapon. And get this, she's currently paralyzed from the waist down after jumping out the window.
Jericho, New York, a man finally found out what was inside the heavy barrel in his crawl space. In 1999, a new homeowner demanded that the old barrel that was in the crawl space be removed before he closed on the house. However, the previous owner said that it was there when he moved in. In fact, his kids used to play hide and seek behind it. So they pull it out to the curb and open it. A horrific smell wafts out of this barrel, and they realize that the body of a woman had been shoved inside. She was a pregnant Hispanic female in her 20s, and it was determined that she had been beaten severely. The drum also contained plastic pellets, artificial green dye, a fake plant stem, and a purse and a notebook. Using a special light, investigators were able to read the notebook, and one page said, "Don't be mad, I told the truth." Inside her purse, they also found a residency card, and they were able to look up the immigration number. They found that the body belonged to a woman named Reina Marroquin, and she worked at a synthetic flower factory in the 60s. One of the phone numbers in the address book belonged to a woman named Kathy Andrade, and investigators called her, and this woman immediately broke down in tears after hearing Reina's name. She told them that her friend had been sleeping with a married man. She got pregnant, and he'd been giving her money and telling her that he'd leave his wife and kids for her. As she entered into the 9th month of pregnancy, she found out that this was all a lie, and she freaked out and decided to call the wife and tell her everything. She then called Kathy and told her that the man had threatened to kill her. The last time she'd ever heard from Reina was January 1969, but Kathy never knew the father of Reina's unborn child, so she didn't know who to refer the police to. After the discovery of the remains was made public, a man also left an anonymous tip with the police. He said that Reina had been sleeping with her boss at the synthetic flower factory. And who was this boss but none other than a man named Howard Elkins, one of the previous owners of the home. He sold the house in 1972, and when police located him at his new residence in Florida, he was extremely combative. The now old man denied everything and refused to give a DNA sample. He was found the next day in his neighbor's car with a shotgun wound to his head. He'd bought a shotgun from Walmart shortly after his police interrogation and taken the easy way out. DNA taken from Howard's body was a match to the fetus found in Reina's stomach. While justice wasn't necessarily served, this story does have a bittersweet ending. They contacted Reina's mother back in El Salvador and found that she had been wondering what happened to her daughter for 30 years after she moved to New York to work in fashion. And how creepy is this? Her mom had had recurring nightmares of her daughter being trapped in a small space screaming for help. Reina's body was transported back to El Salvador, and her mother passed away just a month later, and they were buried side by side.
What the fuck? Is this thing on?
It's been 3 weeks now. I can feel the people searching for Megan are starting to give up. They're not trying anymore. And it's really hard to get volunteers. I think that they might think she's dead. Maybe I do too.
Tonight, a shocking twist in the case of Megan Stewart. The missing girl's best friend, Amy Herman, has now vanished. Are the girls the victims of the same kidnapper, or have they simply run away together? Detective John Simonelli had this to say.
Obviously, the coincidence of both girls, who were friends, disappearing is enormous. We're working all possible scenarios at this time.
A baffling case that grows more bizarre by the hour. We'll be right back.
It has been 2 days since the disappearance of 15-year-old Amy Herman, and 23 days since her best friend Megan Stewart was abducted behind a local diner. Their friends have started a campaign to persuade everyone to tie pink ribbons on trees as a symbol of hope.
We're doing this pink ribbon campaign to let Megan know that we love her and we miss her.
And hopefully it'll make whoever took her, feel bad and let her go. Search parties continue to examine the wooded areas surrounding the two girls' homes for any leads as to their whereabouts. Earlier today, I spoke with Amy's parents.
We'd like to thank all the volunteers that have spent so many hours searching for Amy. We believe in our hearts that she's well and that she will be returned to us. Princess, if you can hear me, we love you. I'm praying for you.
Frank, get the camera. Get the camera, Frank. Hold up right there.